Um, Thank you. And Jess is here to moderate and just make sure we sort of stay on track, so thanks for being with us. She's also going to let me know if during the presentation I'm talking too fast or if I get too serious, which is sort of an ironic twist on this, that the topic is humor and lightness, and one of the things I'll be watching for is to make sure that I don't get myself too serious in the course of it. So welcome again. My name is Meredith Collins. I'll talk a little bit more about myself and my background in a few minutes. The session title, as you can see, is Humor and Lightness in the Face of Struggle, and this is an inquiry that I've been in my own work for a while, and just thought this might be a nice opportunity to share the inquiry and invite people into thinking about this as a component of how we relate to young people, and in the context of learning as we think about it as sort of with a capital L, with education and all of those things that are pretty charged for us these days, but also just in life in general, and in how we relate to young people and when things feel serious. So first, let's see sort of who's here. So far I know people are dropping in one at a time. We already started the recording now. So if you haven't been in a session yet, if you look to the left of the map, you'll see there's a little sunburst, the second icon down, and if you click on that, and double click on that, and then carry it out onto the map, you can put a point, a little pin on your location, and we can just get an idea of where people are participating from. So if you, Jess is going to have to give you whiteboard privileges, I think, to do that. So there's one. There's mine. I'm in Portland, Maine. And then we've got someone in New Zealand, out in the western US. And I thought we had someone in the South Atlantic Ocean, but that was just my sunburst floating out there. And one in India, and then I can't tell, somewhere in the middle of Europe. So did somebody, yeah. Great. Okay. So we've got the map pretty well represented, just in terms of space. Oh, there's somebody else in the western US. I'm not sure if I can see everybody else. I see a little sunburst and then a smiley face. Great. Okay. So you can turn the whiteboard stuff off, Jeff. Thanks. So you'll notice maybe now we actually have the chat window. We're gonna turn off chat privileges for this first part of the presentation. That's mostly so that I don't get distracted, as I'm a little bit distractible. So if you will, there'll be an opportunity for you to participate and contribute to the session later on, and we'll be. The format of the session is going to be a little bit more workshop-y than presentation-y or lecture-y. Like I said before, this whole humor and lightness thing is an inquiry and an exploration for me right now, and it's something just that I want to sort of share as an invitation to inquire into it for yourself and the young people in your life, or all the people in your life, I suppose. So I'll tell you a little bit about myself and my background and how I came to this. As I said earlier, I live in Portland, Maine, and I have a private practice here working directly with young people and their families. And the way I meet families is either just through word of mouth from others who I've been working with for a while, or I sometimes have young people referred after they've had neuropsychological examinations, evaluations with a psychologist in the area, one or the other of the psychologists in the area. And so the kids I work with have a variety of challenges, at least from the, in the opinions of the adults who work with them. Sometimes they're sent for evaluations by teachers at schools, or their parents are concerned about issues that I have. So that's one portion of the work that I do, and in that capacity I work directly with the kids, and then also with their parents on working with them. And then I also work directly with homeschooling families, some directly with kids. A lot of the work I do directly with kids is in the realm of math, because that's an area that I like, and it's also an area that many families are uncomfortable with sort of handling themselves depending on how they're approaching their homeschooling. So, and then I also work with families just who are new to homeschooling or considering it in figuring out what their approach is going to look like or managing challenges as they come up. So that's what I do now, and what led me to this point into doing the kind of work that I do now, and also inquiring into kind of what ways of interacting with kids are most effective, is that I always have enjoyed kids. I babysat as a kid, and I knew that I wanted to work with children, and I didn't necessarily have a dream of becoming a teacher, but I figured that if I wanted to work with kids, and most of the kids, as far as I knew, were in school, that was sort of a sensible thing to do. So I worked for several years as a teacher, and then started working with homeschoolers and interacting with kids and families outside of school, where it just felt like I could have more of the kind of impact that I wanted to have. And so one of the things that I noticed, and that I was always looking at over time, is what were the things about what I did in my work with kids that were effective, and what were the things that I did in my work with kids that didn't seem to be effective, and which things especially seemed to be effective no matter what, from kid to kid, from situation to situation, circumstance to circumstance. I worked in a lot of different kinds of schools as a teacher, and so I had contact, urban and rural, and public and private, and different ages. So I had the opportunity to watch what was working sort of across the board. And the thing that seemed to make the most difference all the way along through was being silly, willing to have a sense of humor. And when I talk about that, I sometimes worry that it sounds as though I mean, I don't know, making jokes about things. And it's been interesting as I've started to do research on this, to find out sort of what the brain processes are about, that relate to humor, and how that may figure in with learning, that usually what I find so far is a lot of information and study about how having the material presented in a funny way affects a person's ability to learn it. And what's been interesting for me is that isn't at all sort of where I see the impact of a sense of humor in an environment where something is being difficult to learn. I'll tell you a story about one of my most challenging teaching experiences was in a 7th grade classroom. So I had a group of especially rambunctious 12-year-olds, and my job with them was to get them writing and to be working on their writing skills, and this was something that they had very little interest in. So early on in the year, I was working on just getting them quiet enough to be able to work on what they were working on. And being quiet is, of course, one of those things that you're supposed to do when you're a teacher in the classroom, and doesn't actually always serve the purpose or serve the intention that you have. But anyway, so that was what I was doing in the moment. So they were like popcorn. One would quiet down a little bit, the other would pop up, one would quiet. And so finally, after several minutes, a little bit of calm came over the room. And just as soon as it settled, one of the faulty springs in the window shades let go, and this probably 10-foot tall shade went flying up across the window and snapped, made the loudest possible noise. And what happened was not that anybody laughed or jolted up or anything, but they all turned their heads around and looked at me to see, of course, what was okay to do in that kind of a situation. The fact that the shade chose that moment to snap up into the air and make this huge racket was hilarious. And you'd have hoped, I think, that everyone would have been able to enjoy that together. But first they had to check, because, of course, at least how it is for many cultures today, the adults are the ones who set the tone. They're the ones that get to decide. We're the ones that get to decide how an environment is going to feel and what's going to be possible in the context of that environment. And so these guys wanted to know, was it going to be okay to enjoy something funny? Was it going to be okay to laugh and to And was I going to be someone that they could connect with about something like that? And so when I talk about humor and lightness, I'm not talking about, sometimes I'm talking about saying funny things, but mostly I'm talking about an environment in which lightness and ease and delight is possible. So that's what we're going to be looking at today and inquiring into. So what I'd like to do next is take a little bit of a poll. This is one of the kind of fun features of this program that we're working with. And so I'm going to ask a question, and then if you look up above your name, I'm actually not looking at the participant window, so if I describe this wrong, that's not the slide. So just above your name, there should be a place where you can answer yes, no, or I don't know if there's another option, yes or no. So this next question, you can take a look at this. Is there something you and your child are dealing with now that feels serious or stuck or hard? So first, it's just a yes or no question. And I don't know whether there's an actual polling permission that Jess needs to give you, but let's see. If you want to put all permissions on for a second, if that's what you need to do. Okay, well, maybe it's not going to show us the polling results. I'm going to assume that there's at least one or two of us that do. I know I do. And when I talk about you and your child, obviously, well, maybe not obviously, but just for the sake of simplicity, I'm going to say your child, even though I realize that there are people probably in attendance who are working with children in some other capacity. Okay, we've got 1 yes and 3 no. Okay, so, 3 yes and 2 no. All right, so great, we've got some of each. So what I'd like to do is get a sense for sort of where people are coming from and what kinds of areas they're encountering some of the serious stuckness difficulty. So I'm gonna create a new page here, and if you next to the what should now be a big open whiteboard, if you click on the little A, if you hover over it, it'll say enter text on page. If Justin gave you whiteboard permissions, and then if you click on that and then move your cursor over onto the page, you should be able to just type right out onto the whiteboard. So if you can just let us know, like in a couple of words, what the area is that is feeling, where the area of stuckness or seriousness or heaviness is. It could be an academic area if you're working with your kids or working with kids on academics. It could be a social challenge. It could be something that has to do with anything, any realm of life. So go ahead and toss a couple of those things up there. We'll just take a couple of minutes. I'll be quiet while you throw a couple of things up there. The conference folks also encouraged us to sort of treat the folks who arrived as our studio audience. So we've also got some other topics to throw up on the whiteboard that we brought with us from other folks that we've spoken with about this topic. So yes, spelling. Okay, great. So feeling like it all sucked after the experience and that's it, it's over. Okay, great. Yes. And if you have more than one, please feel free to put more than one up there. We've got a couple more over here. Oh yes, the swimming. And reading. Okay, we've definitely got the big three. We've got the three R's, which are usually represented. And so if I keep going, if you've got other stuff to add on there. And while we're finishing getting those up on the whiteboard, I just want to say that one of the things that's interesting about this kind of an inquiry, of course, is that a lot of these things are fairly common from one person to the next. So, or from one family to the next. You'll find obviously many in a culture that is very focused on literacy and being literate, that's going to be an area that generates a lot of sort of automatic seriousness or sort of thrown seriousness. It's going to be the first sort of feeling about that. And even if there isn't any indication of struggle or difficulty, that's an area that will invite it. And so if there is any then indication of that that kind of difficulty, it's likely to come up there. And of course, you know, things like learning to swim that would be a big priority for you, for example, if you had a pond on your property, might also be serious for someone else, but not, you know, not because they're not a matter of immediate life and death, not have the same urgency. And so just looking at, as we're in this inquiry, thinking about which of these things are things that just are driven up in their seriousness because of how they are in a culture or because of where you are geographically, or also because of what you have in your own history and experience that creates that sort of immediate first automatic seriousness. So let me just check my notes here. Okay, so I'm wondering if someone would be up for getting on the mic with me and talking through some of one of these kind of serious realms, if you're interested in sort of imagining what adding some humor and lightness would be. So I'm going to give you a minute to sort of think about if you're up for that, and give you a couple of examples of what I've done in what I've done and what I've been able to observe in the academic realms first, because those tend to be sort of high on the list as well. So I'm going to put back I'm going to just have us hang out on the map while we're talking about this. So the spelling is a thing that comes up many times when I'm working with families, because it's like I was saying before, in a literate culture like ours, it's a thing to pay a lot of attention to right off the bat. And so one of the young people that I've been working with came to me after having lots and lots of difficulty with trying lots of different reading programs, writing programs, things that were designed in a variety of ways to address her challenges with getting words the way she wanted them down onto the paper, the way she knew they were sort of expected to look. And when I have to say, like when she came, I immediately felt the wave of that weight, because it was, you know, overdue, time to solve it, time to get it handled. And that's the way, you know, we sort of pass that seriousness around. And so after a couple of times of working with her and watching her sort of interact with her own difficulty, there was a time when she was writing out some words, and she wrote something that we both knew was not at all what she meant to write, and that actually made the sentence seem very silly. She'd meant to write the word horse, and she wrote the word house, and so the sentence said something like, "And then I climbed up on my house." And that was just like with the shades flying up in the 7th grade classroom. That was one of those moments where there was this opportunity to say, to just say, "Oh no, it should be horse, it should be house instead of horse, or it should be horse instead of house." And instead, we both just laughed. And it seems like something that simple can't make that much of a difference, but whenever from that point on she would make a mistake, she would actually talk to herself about it, and she would say, "Oh, really? That's what's going to happen with my brain now?" And that made so much more possible for her, because not only because she was allowed to be silly about things, but also because she knew that we could make whatever was happening into a different kind of an experience, and that she would be able to sort of use me as a way to sort of reflect back a different kind of experience of her own attempts at literacy. It's also been possible. I've also had lots and lots of opportunities to do the same thing with math. As everybody knows, math is the thing that sort of grips us and is cyclical, and it's kind of passing the difficulty on from generation to generation, and from teacher to student, and from parent to child. And there are a lot of people doing a lot of great work now about how to have math become something that is more enjoyable and more accessible. But in the meantime, it's very serious business. And so, you know, what's tempting to say when you sit down with a child who's struggling to memorize their multiplication facts or something is like, okay, we've got to do this. We've got to practice. We've got to get this down. We've got to figure this out. This is going to be really important for when you're doing fractions and for when you're doing algebra. And it's tiresome, and it gets, you know, there's plenty of evidence to suggest that the brain doesn't respond well to restriction and constriction and heaviness. It doesn't mean that we can't be focused and really attentive to what we're doing, but being able to kind of relax that energy is really important, seems to be really important. One of the other things that I meant to mention when I was talking a little bit about the literacy realm is that, but is also true in the realm of math and any other area, even just sort of social and emotional things as well, is that when kids feel like the stakes are really high and that the adults that they're with are worried about how they're doing or that they're not progressing quickly enough, then what often happens is that they get more careful about not making mistakes. So a kid who's struggling with writing maybe says, okay, I know that it really worries my mom when I spell things wrong, because she gets scared that I'm never going to figure this out, and she is worried that I won't be able to go to college, or whatever the stakes are that they've experienced. And so they're writing along, and they decide that instead of risking writing something the quote wrong way, they'll just stick with the stuff that they already know. And that I don't have to tell any of you that really costs us all a lot when that happens. When kids are just holding themselves back to make sure that nothing, you know, that they don't step outside of what they already know, we miss out on the potential that they have for growing into their fullest selves. It's very much true in the realm of math, and it's a narrowing that I see in all of the areas that I work with kids in, where they, in their fear of disappointing and upsetting and failing for themselves and for the adults that they care about, they keep to what's safe and they keep to what they know. And so with math, one of the things that I really try to do is just talk about it like the beast that kids are often experiencing it as. And instead of that, as I was saying before, that you have to learn this, it's very important, there's a lot that's riding on this, to say, oh, the nerve of these multiplication facts, keeping themselves unmemorized, whatever it is, whatever goofy thing. Very often I say things that sound so stupid. And then often the things that I say that are stupid and sound stupid and don't even really make any sense and aren't that funny are even funnier and loosen things up and lighten the mood even more, and are even more effective. And so, you know, this piece of it that I think I mentioned earlier about that being, you know, introducing humor is not so much about telling a joke, but about a tone that you're taking, and that very often our tone is dictated by whatever we're thinking about that's down the road, whatever worry we have about what's going to happen in the future, whatever we're afraid that this lack or this failing that we're seeing is how it's going to impact the future. And that even in the face of that, and perhaps especially in the face of that, to be able to say, okay, this feels like really high stakes. It feels like there's a lot on the line here. And I know that if I bring all of the weight of that, I'm going to lock down the interaction rather than open it up, which is what I actually want. So I think that's, I'll sometimes hear from people, and this is something I thought might come up today too, is that people will say to me, well, that's fine, but I'm not funny, and I don't really want to be funny. I don't want to have to be funny. I shouldn't have to be funny. And I think that's funny is, of course, a matter of opinion. There are kids that I work with who don't think I'm particularly funny. It's not certainly about funny as much as it is about the possibility of lightness that comes with kids, comes built into all of us, and often gets sort of squeezed out by the worlds of concern and worry and expectation that we put on ourselves and then pass on to young people. So the other piece is that very often when I talk with folks about this, it can start to feel like, okay, great. So if my child is struggling with spelling, or my child is resisting practicing multiplication facts, or they never want to take out the trash, if I just get more cheerful about it and I just lighten the mood a little bit, then I can get them to do it. And sometimes that's true, but when I also do sort of warn people that when you come into it, as with anything with young people, with an agenda that you're interested in pushing through, particularly if it's an agenda that isn't aligned or hasn't yet been aligned with whatever the young person's agenda is or commitment, it can backfire or worse. Which, in this case, I think the worst is to strain the relationship further. And what humor does for me when I'm using it with young people is, and what I see it doing when I'm working with young people, and also when I see other adults using humor this way with young people, is that it lets them know that they're with another person, that they're in a situation where they have some social currency, not in the sense of like that they can, not in the sense of power, like that they can manipulate or that they can force or they can make things happen, but that they have an opportunity to connect and that there's a space for them in it. And when that happens, what becomes possible is a collaboration between the adult and the young person. And I really believe that is actually what gives access to progress and movement. And sometimes it does come in the form of the thing that the adult set out to achieve with the child or to offer them or to teach them. But very often it just relaxes things enough to find out what else is possible. Sometimes in the form of realizing that, for example, this is an example like with many of the young people that I've worked on math with, when we relaxed a little bit around the concern about memorizing and figure out what it is that's in the way and find a way to be light about it. It sometimes turns out that there's a way to go back a little bit in the process and find things that are missing that have sort of been in the way of the memorizing. For a lot of young people, just memorizing something off the bat without a better, and we all know this, we know this about conceptual understanding, but sometimes you find out that a kid is going to be more effective learning something in a totally different way or needs another kind of grounding or another kind of explanation. And that is possible, that's certainly possible in the context of serious, buckled down, kind of like, let's try all of the different methods of teaching this. That's certainly possible in that kind of a context. But when kids feel heard and feel connected with, in this way that I'm talking about with sort of introducing a lightness, then they can be on the team of figuring out what that is. And when they're not on the team, they tend to feel like pawns, like they're just being moved around, and the adults are going to figure it out, or they're not going to figure it out, and they don't have much say in it. And that possibility of establishing a relationship, restoring a relationship that has gone missing in the dynamic of, adults figuring out what kids have to do and what they need, and not really including them in the process of that is, I think, the real gold that's possible in lightening things up when there's an opportunity to. So what I'd like to do next is we'll take a couple of minutes. I've talked a lot now, longer than I planned to, but I want to give you a chance to just kind of reflect on your own, some of those things that you posted or things that you've found to be sort of laden with seriousness in the past, if that's felt like it's inhibited something or blocked something from becoming possible. And just take a minute, if you have a notebook nearby or you have a place on your computer where you can type a little bit, and just, I'm going to advance the slides because I've got this question written out. So if you can think of the most recent time you and your child felt stuck about something, and speaking of lightness, the first time I wrote this first line, it said something like, think of the most recent time you felt stuck with your child, which obviously wasn't what I meant. I meant stuck with you and your child. But anyway, so I decided I would change it so it didn't say stuck with your child. So in that situation, whatever it was, where the seriousness was there and the weight was there and you had all kinds of concern and it was super important to get the thing figured out and learned and fast, and whatever that kind of tone was, these are just a couple of questions to sort of ask yourself as you're reflecting on that. What kinds of things were you saying? What kinds of things were you doing? And what was the tone of the interaction like? In other words, what was your being like? What was the feeling of it for you, as well as possibly what do you think it felt like to the child involved? So we're going to take just about a minute. I'll give you a few seconds to kind of find a place to write, and then we'll check back. And then the second minute, we're going to do a little bit of imagining forward to ways that it might be alterable. So I'm going to turn my mic off. We'll just be quiet for a little bit, and then I'll pop it back on. Okay, you can keep going with that if you have more to do, but I'm just going to advance the slide to the next one. So then the next part, if you imagine the next time that you're confronting that or facing that or another similar situation, maybe there's something that you anticipate is coming, and what you might alter in the realm of adding lightness. What could you say or do that might lighten things up? And once you've imagined that, if you imagine some things that you could say or do, what kind of an impact do you imagine that it might have? What kind of, it's difficult to know, but you know your child well, or the child that you're imagining or that you've worked with or will work with again. What do you imagine the impact might be, and what could shift and what might become possible? So just take another minute or two and do a little bit of written reflection about that, and then we're going to ask if a couple of people might share from what they've seen. Okay, so if you can find a good stopping place. And then if anyone's up for sharing, I'd love to hear and share with the others just anything that you saw or occurred to you as you were considering this. So if you are up for talking, you can push the little hand button that's up above your little participant window. Great. Okay, Allison said Justin's going to hand you the mic.
Okay, so I don't know, can people hear me? I guess
Yep.
We don't have chat, so I'm not sure, but I guess you can hear me, Meredith?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, so I actually have, I missed the beginning of what you were talking about, but I've done a lot of thinking, I think, in sort of this area, and my kids are older, they're not young anymore, they're in college and out of college, but I can recollect some situations as you suggested, so I thought I'd talk about them. One in particular is when my teenager, I want to say it was 15 or 16, would, so we were homeschooling, he would say, yeah, I'm going to work on this thing, I'm going to go and I'll do all this work. And then, days would go by and I would sort of check in and, how's it going? So it's going great, I've gotten all this done. And a couple weeks go by and he ultimately sort of fesses up that he hasn't really been doing any of that and he's been lying all along. And so, yeah. So, okay, so right there, I don't really recollect what I said at the time, but I can, I suspect that I was, upset with him. But really reflecting on it back now, I have such a different perspective. So I work with teenagers at the Princeton Learning Cooperative, where, so they're all homeschoolers, so lots of them come out of school or they're long-term homeschoolers. And I've worked with kids who I think have lied, in my more recent, and my understanding about it is so much different if you just sort of see it from their perspective, that they want to be the perfect person that maybe you envision them to be, and so sometimes if you can just lighten it up a little bit, and because you want to come down really hard and heavy, well, you're lying, I don't trust you anymore, and you've lost my trust, all these things. But, if you sort of see it from their perspective, they did it for you sometimes. You know what I mean? Because they want you to think well of them, like as a parent, They want the parent to love them. And it's changed the way that, that I think about, situations like that and how I try to deal with situations where I think a kid is lying, a little differently, help them not see it as this, that they're really a bad person and that they've lost my trust and, all these things. Yeah. So I don't know. So Meredith, I don't know if you have any further thoughts on that. But
I think that's a great example. I really appreciate you bringing that up because I think it is, that's been my experience too, that it feels, and I feel, I often am saying to parents, it's not that I don't have that surge of like, I can't believe you did this, or why aren't you remembered, whatever that thing is, but just like recognizing over time that they're always, and that great, that great 3 little words that, or maybe they're 4, that all behavior is communication, and that, if you're coming from a place of expecting that people are looking for ways to connect and looking for those ways that they're trying to connect and then receiving them that way, you end up having a really different kind of interaction with them. And that's exactly what, that's exactly what I wanted to sort of offer today, is that it can be actually quite simple, the action of it. It's the first part, which I think you were also speaking to, of like getting past whatever your own projection onto the thing that's happening is, and whatever we've said to ourselves about what lying means and what it must mean about what's happening, that just to get to that place where you can say, wow, I wonder what's going on here, it's extremely simple and yet can be very difficult. and so I think that's a really great example of it too, because it's I think with those sort of social pieces and interactive pieces, it's even more, it's even more present. I get a lot more examples of, just because of the kind of work that I do, where people are bringing kids to me because they want their literacy challenges resolved, or their math difficulties resolved, or whatever else that's sort of a first line of thing. But how we're showing them how it's possible to be humans in the world is really, I think, what it ultimately comes down to for all of us. So thanks so much for sharing that. I just had my mic off for a long time and I thought it was on. So I'll go back. You can go ahead and call on the hand that's raised. Hello?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, this is Florence, even though it says Kate's Folly. Hi there.
Hi, Florence.
Hi. As you were talking, I was getting this unbelievable memory about trying to help my stepdaughter with math. And so this is not we're homeschooling our son in a very unschooly way. But for a lot of years, my stepdaughter was in a public school, and it was my job to help with the math homework. I was the math person in the household. And your images of the heaviness and how it sort of permeated the feeling and the relationship, I swear, it was so palpable. And I was just thinking back about how stuck I felt all those years, because it was age 5 to age probably 16 that I was helping her with her math homework. And I would sit there in the situation and go, how can I convey to her that this isn't a horrible thing and it's okay to make mistakes? It seemed like she was very angry, and the anger had to do with a tightness about getting it right and perfectionism. And I didn't know how to loosen it up at all. And my guess is I would say something sort of sober and serious like, it's okay to try different ways or something, and I would be very awkward, but I couldn't for the life of me figure out how to make her laugh, and that would have meant the world to me to be able to do that in that situation.
Yeah, and I'm really glad you brought that up too, because I think one of the things that we can sort of see how if we were being like jerks about with whatever we were saying, like if we were saying, hurry up, why can't you get this? What's wrong with you? Then it would be more obvious how to alter it in a way that would be effective. But when we're not doing that, when we're saying, like you said, like very compassionate and like, I'm really trying, I want to help you, that can seem like, well, that's so supportive and so warm, and of course it's well-intentioned and it's kind. But I think what you're pointing to is that it still can feel really heavy, because of course it also, part of the reason for that probably is that it still communicates some of that, like, I'm really worried about this, or I really want to try to figure out what, and I think that's exactly the kind of situation where it can be perplexing about how to introduce a different tone. In looking back now, does the distance offer you any ideas about what you might have tried? Does it look the same?
I can imagine things that my husband would have done, because he has an actual sense of humor, and this is where, what you talk about, that you don't have to be able to tell jokes, but I can't even conceive what I would have said, and I feel like it would have shifted the whole pattern of our relationship even outside of the math homework, because the math homework, like, we both dreaded it, and I don't know what I would have done.
Yeah. Except for that you just made us laugh by saying your husband had an actual sense of humor. So, I mean, I'm only speaking for myself. I can't hear anyone else, but my guess is I wasn't the only one who laughed. But I think that's also another piece that's really important here, which is that when we imagine, okay, I have to be this other way. The way that I'm being now doesn't work, so I have to be this other way. that it can feel like that other way is a set thing. So, you know, someone else would be able to do this, or something else would, you know, would change this. But everything that I have available right now is not sufficient in some way. And I think that's one of the things that, you know, it's that same sort of question. But I'm not funny. And were you ever able to make her laugh other times? Did you laugh with her, or do you, outside of the math?
So rarely.
Uh-huh. And you said something, you were talking about that, like that there was a sort of like a space for transformation of all of that as well. So, because I'm imagining that were there other, how about this? How about another piece? Like, have there been times when you experienced a lighterness with her, even if it wasn't what you described as sort of funny or laughing?
I mean, I think that when I think about the saying, you know, like if your dad were doing this, this would be, a barrel of laughs or something, would have probably lightened it. Just to admit that I was feeling terribly inadequate in that situation, or that I was feeling terribly sour or dour or serious, might have helped. Like, just to say something like, well, I don't know what. Like just to confess my sense of inadequacy, but in sort of a funny way, it probably would have diffused some of the tension, because it would have taken the attention and focus off of her.
Yeah, and also that's that does that thing of indicating your own humanness, and that there's I think the primary power in something like that is, as you said, to take the focus off and have it not feel like it's just heavy and intense right there. But also that then you offer something into the relationship rather than the sort of two separate sides. Not that there were sides. I don't really mean sides, but the two sort of separate components of the interaction. I think that you're right on about that, and that's exactly what I sort of wanted to find a way to articulate, because it really, I don't think one has to be funny in any objective kind of way, or has to be funny to the person even that they're trying to introduce the lightness to, but that drawing on your own stores of lightness, if you have them, if you have access to them, can offer that across the table. And I think you're probably right that would have, anything that you could offer her that shifted that and just kind of sort of interrupted the pattern too. I think that probably more than humor itself is what does that job. And I was looking up humor, and it's actually, of course, means fluid, which I think is kind of nice, because it's actually about, humor in the body is actually about flow and about movement. And you're talking about sort of taking the funny part out and just looking for a place of mobility in your interactions with her. So I think it sounds pretty much spot on based on what you've described. Thanks so much, Florence. I've almost entirely run us out of time here, so we're going to just wrap up. If anyone has anything else that they want to throw in, I want to thank you so much for joining me this afternoon. This was something of an experiment for me. I haven't tried this format before, and it's quite a bit to manage. So I appreciate your hanging in there. Okay, all right, we'll call on Sarah briefly, and then actually before you open up Sarah's mic, I'm just going to move over to this last slide I have here. A couple of related resources, things that I've been looking at and reading as part of my inquiry into the effects of humor and about lightening up and what kind of effect it actually has on the brain and on relationships. So if you're interested in reading more of these few things, the Zebras book has been around for a while. from the latest edition, 2004, but it's just packed with science that's related to the effects of stress on the brain and on functioning and aging. The Psychology of Humor is sort of a collection of the more academic book, and then Always How to Talk So Kids Will Listen, Listen So Kids Will Talk has just great stuff in it. I'll also ask Jess to put up my website address on the screen if you would, so that if you're interested in, this is the kind of, what we're talking about today is the kind of thing I carry on about on my blog. So if you're interested in following that, please come visit the blog. And did we lose Sarah's hand? We can go over to Sarah if she's still up for it. If you can call on her. Oh, the website popped off. I'll put it back up there. Are you there, Sarah? Hello?
Can you hear me now?
She's on a tablet. Can you hear me? Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead.
I just wanted to thank you for your talk. It was really great and helpful. And I know we're almost out of time, but I'm just wondering about that sense of humor. I could relate to the last person talking about missing the opportunity, and I'm wondering if about like going back, even if the person's 16, and kind of saying, oh, it was really hard for me to help you with math because I felt so insecure, or trying to make a connection, or does that seem like you kind of miss those times? Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. And I think that's a really nice point also to think about. I am very often, when I talk with parents about things that are going on with their kids, they're very often say, but, they'll come to me and say, oh, I did not like the way I handled this, and now I've created this awful, uncomfortable dynamic, and the thing went horribly and whatever. And I really believe that some of the richest opportunities are in the debriefing, are in the going back and saying, like, wow, I just realized that, it doesn't erase, Florence was talking about there were a lot of difficult years and difficult times, and that it doesn't, it's not going to make that go away. But there's an opportunity in the present always, I think, to create new availability within the relationship by sharing what you've noticed about what went on and about what you might do differently again if you had the opportunity. And so I think that not as and sometimes it does repair, sometimes it does, put something into the experience in the past that helps, but then other times it just, or I shouldn't say just, but it creates something, something becomes possible going forward that wouldn't have been if you had just left it how it had been. So I think that's, I think there's always opportunity to use whatever has not worked as well as what has. So, yeah, thanks for asking that. All right, I think we're actually going to get thrown out if we don't stop now. So I just want to thank everyone for being with me today and for hanging in there, and also being committed to having the best possible experience with kids and providing the best possible environment for them growing. So thanks so much for coming.